Are you or anyone else you know interested in buying or selling a home? How about saving the planet? Climate Change Realty is the only company operating in all 50 states that allows you to create thousands of dollars in donations absolutely for free. Yes, that's right. Our service and your donations are free. Climate Change Realty can connect you with one of the best real estate agents in your city. And because of that connection, a full 25% of your real estate agent's commissions will be donated to a 501c3 nonprofit organization of your choice. Real estate agents earn between 2 to 3% of the final sales price when they help you buy or sell a home. That's at least $500 donated for every $100,000 worth of real estate sold when you find your real estate agent with Climate Change Realty. Visit www.ccrboulder.com today and click Find an Agent to help us transform the real estate market into a battery for the regenerative economy. Welcome to the podcast. Miguel, great to meet you, man. Thanks for coming on the show. I'm excited for the chat.
Thank you very much for having me, Ethan.
Yeah, you're very welcome. And this is a topic that I've been looking to cover for a while, and I'm excited to have you because you're a real expert on this topic. So I think this is going to be really fun and really beneficial for people who have never discussed or even know what a mangrove is. So before we get into the science of it, I just wanted to get a little bit of background on who you are and how you got to be doing this work over the years.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity, Ethan. So yes, my name is Miguel Cifuentes. I was born Ecuadorian, grew up in the Galapagos Islands. My father was the director of the Galapagos National Park. And having grown in the Galapagos, it's clear to me now that shaped my view of the world and my involvement with nature and conservation. At one point, we moved to Costa Rica. My father had got his graduate degree here, and the Galapagos Islands that I remember, or where I grew up, was very dry. Everything's rocky. They're volcanic islands. And moving to Costa Rica, it just blew my mind. Everything's green. It rains like enormous amounts of water through the seasons. So that change just completely finished my or started my real fascination with nature. Why do things happen, and why are things different? And so I embarked on a science career. Back when I went to college, there was no natural resources management degree, which is what I wanted to become over time. So I went into forest engineering. There was a time where I could design bridges and roads and harvest timber sustainably. Uh, but my first job was actually a research job with OTS, the Organization for Tropical Studies. I manage a long-term ecosystem research project there, and that hooked me with the science world, the asking questions and figuring out complex problems at the ecosystem level. And this was back in the mid early 90s, and climate change was a new hot topic by then. And I remember attending a few talks from expert scientists that would come through La Selva Biological Station in Costa Rica to do their research, and they shared their experience and their concern about global climate change, global warming, we used to call it back then, and the idea of trying to tackle such a large issue. Completely fascinated. Took over my life. I went on to graduate school in the U.S. Went to North Carolina State in forestry again, and then moved on to a PhD in environmental sciences at Oregon State University. But always more and more strongly linked to global change issues. And you know, I've I've done quite a few things along the way. I used to work with a large applied research center here in Costa Rica, so CATIE. It's a combination of applied research center and graduate school. So I was a graduate professor for a little over 13 years. At the time, I still have master's and PhD students that I work with, and they're doing really cool research. But recently, I've moved into conservation, into working with Conservation International, and my rationale for that was I've been doing research for a very long time, and a lot of what the research I was doing was applied in nature, trying to solve really complex uh, challenges for people on the ground to preserve their natural ecosystems, strengthen their livelihoods. But a lot of that research felt constrained spatially. And part of that was the nature of the institution I was working in. And part of it was my realization that the global challenges that we're facing are that they're global, and we need to expand our actions, expand our impacts. And Conservation International is a leading NGO that focuses on those really large challenges. And so I, I saw in joining them a really good opportunity to uh, maybe influence action at that larger scale, which is a fascinating idea and topic, and I'm super excited to be doing what I'm doing right now.
Definitely. So, what exactly does Conservation International focus on? What are like their focal points that they try to drive action through?
Uh-huh. Yes. So as I mentioned, we're a global nonprofit organization, and we protect nature for the benefit of people. So we center on people and providing them with services and with goods that come from nature. So as we protect the oceans, the land, and the forests, we are enabling or we're securing the provision of food, fresh water, better livelihoods, and stable climate for the entire humanity. And one of the really cool principles about Conservation International's work is that we combine science and field work with with policy and finance mechanisms, and through that combination of work, we have helped protect I don't know, something a little over 6 million square kilometers. That's over 2 million square miles, probably if I do the
A lot of
math.
football fields.
A lot of football fields, that's for sure. And we
Yeah.
have a global scope. We work in over 70 countries now.
Really, really cool. Yeah, so today, like I said, we're gonna talk about mangroves, and something that I find very curious is that when you think about talking about climate change or reforestation, there's a lot of discussion of specifically the Amazon rainforest and rainforests in general. But
Uh-huh.
today, I really want to talk about this idea of blue carbon. So you're also involved with this international blue carbon initiative, right? Can you kind of explain what blue carbon is and what the initiative is as well?
Yes, yeah, that's right. So blue carbon is the carbon that is captured by living organisms in coastal ecosystems, coastal and marine ecosystems. Right now, we're focusing on mangroves, salt marshes, and seagrasses because those we see are the ecosystems that are more amenable to management and to develop policy actions and conservation activities that will enable us to optimize the benefits, both the climate benefits, the livelihood benefits, and the financial benefits from their conservation and restoration. So these ecosystems have a very unique capacity or potential to sequester really large amounts of CO2, carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and store that into their biomass, into their sediments. So if I can give you some numbers here and not bore the audience, terrestrial forests uh, sequester or they store up to 400, say 500 tons of carbon per hectare as their maximum level of sequestration or accumulation. When we are dealing with mangroves, we have measured storage rates or storage amounts over 1,000 tons of carbon per hectare. So we're talking at least
Wow.
double the amount of carbon that these coastal marine ecosystems can sequester compared to terrestrial ecosystems.
Your dog's really excited about how much carbon we can store in the mangroves.
Can you hear that? I thought I had set my filter on. Sorry about that. I thought I had muted
All
that
good.
background noise. So well, I was saying, there is a considerable amount of carbon that these coastal marine ecosystems can sequester, and for for many years we had ignored these coastal ecosystems as tools for addressing global challenges, and this I think goes back to maybe the philosophical conversation we were having before we started.
I do love those.
What is out of sight is out of mind, and we had focused there's this really large group of oceanographers and physical oceanographer people looking at how carbon is sequestered in the oceans and distributed all over the world. And then we have the terrestrial people. I was one of them. I'm still one of them, looking at terrestrial forests. And we're as we're looking at the forest, and I'm looking at the forest outside my window. We were giving, you know, whatever was on our backs, we couldn't see. And then the oceanographers were doing the same thing, looking at the water, the oceans, and ignoring what was happening behind them. And there was this sandwiched ecosystem or set of ecosystems in between that had fallen in through the cracks. And what we
Wow.
realized is that these ecosystems, one, they have this very high capacity for absorbing carbon, so they have a really strong role for carbon mitigation. But at the same time, because they're at the interface between oceans and water, they have very unique properties that we can take advantage of to promote and secure strong livelihoods for local communities. So these ecosystems provide,
Right.
we're calling these ecosystem services, and water filtration. They're nurseries for commercial fisheries, fish species. People harvest timber and other resources from them. They get their food from them. Some people around the world see these ecosystems as cultural places and spiritual places that are also provided. And because of the nature of them being near the shore, they can also act as buffers from storms, from increasing sea level rise, and those are what we call adaptation services. So in a sense, these ecosystems protect people from the increasing negative impacts from climate change dynamics in general. So we have all these different dimensions of benefits and properties that these ecosystems can or are actively providing to humanity, and we just needed to look at them more closely. And from that idea, the International Blue Carbon Initiative sparked and started as a way to organize all these ideas. And we believe that by developing knowledge and sharing that knowledge, we can inform decision making and actions on the ground and influence positively the lives of people living in these coastal areas.
Yeah, and that's fantastic. So just to clarify, what we're discussing is, by the way, in case people don't know, the largest carbon sink on the planet by far is the ocean. I'm correct on that, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So we were just discussing the terrestrial land, which is what all humans live on, unless you live on a cruise ship or something. But and that has a lot of potential for carbon drawdown through trees. We talk about boreal forests and
Boreal.
rainforests, and soils can sequester carbon as well. And then the ocean sequesters carbon through phytoplankton and different things. But specifically, we're talking about. I love how you said that kind of the terrestrial research or people out in the field are looking at the ground, and then the ocean conservationists are looking at the ocean. But there's this really interesting space in between where, when you were talking about this, whatever a hectare is, you're talking about this space where I'm just messing around. I know it's a European measurement. Right on the coastline, these specific, and these are plants that are specifically have evolved to live right next to the ocean and
Uh-huh.
next to the land. That those are the ones that specifically are able to sequester as much as 2 times as much as a terrestrial tree. Is that what you were saying?
Yes, twice or up to 5 times as much carbon.
And this is why we're doing this podcast.
Yeah.
So when it comes to the issues we're facing when it comes to conserving these lands, what is currently threatening it right now, and
Uh-huh.
how can we kind of fix it?
I would say, following up on my previous idea, because these ecosystems have been largely ignored or just glossed over in national policy and global attention, they are highly threatened by land use change. So the coastal development model just sees these mangroves and seagrasses and other coastal ecosystems as a hindrance to developing large tourism infrastructures, roads, um, agricultural expansion. So all these different human activities or alternative human activities are encroaching into these coastal marine ecosystems, and we have large areas of mangroves being lost through what we call this land use change process. So we see a mangrove area, but we want to build a hotel there. So the simple answer is just chop down the mangroves and build your building there. You need to expand your cattle raising operation.
What exactly is a mangrove?
That is we should have addressed that first. So
Yeah, no worries.
a single mangrove is a tree that is adapted to growing into waterlogged conditions, saltwater waterlogged conditions. So as the tides go up and down, and there's daily cycles behind this. They flood areas near the coast, and as you know, and our audience is familiar with, if you water a plant way too much, they drown. Mangroves, as a tree or a species or a type of forest, have evolved over time to survive in these continuously waterlogged conditions. And seawater is very salty, and the sodium in that seawater is normally toxic to terrestrial plants. And mangrove species in mangrove forests have evolved adaptations to exclude the sodium from being toxic. So they have ways to capture that sodium, separate it out, and toss it out their leaves, for example. So if you were to lick a mangrove leaf, it's salty. And you look at it against the sun, and you can see the salt crystals shine on the bottom of the leaf surface. It's fascinating. So they have all these different adaptations that have allowed them and continue to allow them to thrive in an area where otherwise terrestrial plants would not be able to grow.
Yeah. I think people, I mean, should really recognize how truly spectacular and evolutionary feature that is to be able to, I mean, salt like kills things. I mean, we literally use salt to like cook. Back in the day, we used to use salt to preserve things. That's
Mhm, mhm.
absolutely incredible that these mangroves can do this. And that's why they're such a pivotal species to like regulating our climate system. Like it's just great. So back on the topic of conservation issues, I'm curious, like where are the main areas where these species are growing, and then how is tourism affecting that? Back on that
Uh-huh.
topic.
Yes. So the blue carbon ecosystems, mangroves, salt marshes, and seagrasses are mostly tropical types of ecosystems. So this belt, um, north and south of the equator on Earth, where we have larger amounts of sunlight, warmer temperatures, and more stable climate. That is where these ecosystems are usually found. Uh, some of them can expand towards subtropical conditions, climate conditions. So we have mangroves in southern Florida, for example, in Puerto Rico and things like that. But the largest areas of mangrove are in Asia, and we have a lot of mangrove also um, in the equatorial zone of Africa, and then the Americas, the Caribbean, all of the Caribbean coast of the Caribbean basin, and then also Central America as well, going all the way up to Mexico, the Yucatan Peninsula, and the Gulf of Mexico as well.
So there's a lot of them. It sounds like.
Well, I was gonna say, we have a lot of mangroves, but relatively speaking, they amount to about less than 1% of all the forest in the world. But the key thing here is to remember that although they are less than 1% of the total terrestrial forest area, they're able to sequester 5 times more carbon. And that's where things start clicking, because every unit of area of mangrove that we lose, we're losing 5 times more carbon than if we were to lose that same unit of area on terrestrial land. And I just quickly looked up, and a hectare is 2.47 acres.
Right. Nice. Oh, now I know that in real estate terms, acres. I know that.
There you go.
Um, so what trends are we seeing in these mangrove forests? It's very interesting that you say that they're 1% but they're a kind of like a focal point when it comes to carbon drawdown. So are we seeing like huge like recession like we are in other forests?
The I'll start with the negative trend, and then I'll talk about the way of potentially reverting that. So over the last decade or so, or even a little longer, we have lost more than 30% of all mangroves globally. That is very alarming. When we talk about deforestation rates, yearly deforestation rates, anything beyond or greater than 2% deforestation rate is considered a high rate. And for mangroves, we've, depending on where on the planet you are, we have gone beyond a 4% yearly deforestation rate. So we're doubling the rate of loss that terrestrial forests have. So that is one concern that we have. And this is due to agricultural expansion, um, uh, shrimp farming. You mentioned oil palm as well, cattle raising that goes into the coastal areas, um, commercial agriculture crops, sugarcane, rice, and some other products that encroach onto that onto those coastal areas. Also, draining of these coastal ecosystems to build roads, to build uh, all sorts of human infrastructure, ports, tourism infrastructure, and all of these different human activities that are close to the coastal fringe are encroaching actively and alarmingly into the natural areas where mangroves and other blue carbon ecosystems are currently living. The, the good news here is that restoration or ecological restoration of these ecosystems is possible, and it's increasing its traction traction globally. One very key difference between terrestrial restoration and blue carbon restoration is that we have realized over time that we cannot plant mangroves as if we were planting, I don't know, pine trees or other species in terrestrial forest. Because if we go back a few minutes in our conversation, I was relating how these mangrove ecosystems were adapted to flooded conditions and salty conditions. And so if we just go in an area and plant mangroves, we might be missing the mark for that ecological equilibrium that is optimum for mangrove growth. So what we do now is we look at the hydrology of the sites and we work towards restoring that hydrology. So how much seawater comes in and out of the area, how often, how long does it stay in the area, and how much the sea level uh, floods that area. And we play with those variables to determine what would be the most optimal species to grow. And you know, it's fascinating to know that nature can fix itself. So by providing these degraded sites or areas where we formerly had mangroves and they were converted to something else, when we restore these ideal ecological conditions, nature comes in and we have really good success at recovering mangroves just by enabling these right ecological conditions. And we don't have to go in and plant mangroves as much as we used to do before. And years ago, we would go and plant huge amounts of mangroves, and most of them died because the hydrology wasn't right. So we've learned from that, and now we're working again to restore the natural conditions, and then nature does most of the work. We still have to go back in and tweak the sites. Maybe we didn't get the hydrology exactly right the first time, so we need to do some additional interventions or actually plant. But then it would be a reduced area.
How do you go about restoring hydrology to an area if that's specifically like ocean water flows, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. It's really cool. So I'm a forest engineer, and I'm still fascinated by machines. uh, so it's really cool and so people in this space are starting to talk about ecological engineering. Um, Instead of us doing mangrove restoration, we're engineering the site to recover its ecological conditions. And some of this depends on the amount of degradation that the site has suffered. Sometimes mangrove forests are cut, and for whatever reason, the local people who did that end up not using that land. So that's very, very little disturbance. And then it's just easy to clean out the channels that bring water in and out of that site. And again, nature takes its course, and uh, the restoration of that site is relatively simple. There are other sites where, because of the type of intervention and the length of use of that area, um, the ecological conditions are very much destroyed. So I have this example. We have a project in the Pacific coast of Costa Rica, close to the city of Punta Arenas, where we have a long history of agricultural use in the upper, mid, and lower parts of the watershed. This was one of the first areas that the Spanish conquistadors came and developed agriculturally. It looks a little bit similar to parts of Spain, so they were used to those environments, and they came in and they they cut down the forest, and they had cattle, and they planted sugarcane and all these things. But over hundreds of years, those unsustainable agricultural practices have been feeding lots of eroded soil onto the coast. And that has been blocking the natural flow of seawater and fresh water that nurtures mangroves along this coastal marine fringe. So for the first time in history in Central America, we had to restore those sites. We actually had to use machinery, heavy machinery. So we had backhoes and bigger machines and flattening machines moving tens of thousands of tons of material of eroded material and sediment out of the site. We reshaped the natural channels. Fortunately, we had aerial photographs from back in the 1940s, so we knew where the natural flows of the rivers were back then. So we rebuilt the rivers in that area, and yeah, this is fascinating. Just a couple of weeks, let's say a month or month and a half after we started doing that, and the water actually started flowing back into the site, we could see the seedlings of mangrove species already growing in there. So there's this video where yeah, I kind of get sentimental with these things sometimes because nature is so fascinating. We've degraded the site over 400 plus years, and then you do something. This takes a lot of effort and engineering design, but within a month and a half, you have like thousands of these little plants already colonizing the site. It's like like mind blown at the power of nature and its ability to heal itself if you provide it with the right conditions to come back. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's really awesome and heartening as well. When it came to that specific project, where did the funding come for all that heavy machinery to go in and do that work?
We have a very generous donor that is involved in supporting this type of work, and being it a really innovative project, this hadn't been done before in Central America or the Caribbean area, uh, and to this magnitude. So they were very generous with it and trustworthy, and I think their bet paid off because the project is a huge success right now. We're very happy. We're actually starting to talk to them about a second phase of that project.
Yeah, I think that's great, and it just goes to show that we in the past we just haven't understood how ecosystems work and how essential they are to our life. And I think that because of the amazing work of people like you and conservationists and other scientists around the world, we're understanding the way these systems work and how we can interact with them. I'm always trying to figure out ways to provide some sort of economic incentive to regenerate these areas. I really believe there's a lot of negative press and negative and pessimism surrounding our ecological situation, and fair enough, we're sucking up resources and degrading areas, but once you go back in and really focus on regeneration, we could actually come back out of this with even more life than back in 1800 or before, and that keeps me really optimistic and positive. Do you want to give me a brief synopsis of your most recent publication, which is specifically around aquaculture shrimp ponds and how that regulates the mangrove soils?
Yes. Um, so maybe a bit of background. Mangroves sequester the atmospheric carbon both on what we call the biomass, so the tree trunks, the branches, and the seedlings, and the live material that we see above ground. But one of the unique features of mangrove and other blue carbon ecosystems is that in addition to that biomass sequestration, they also sequester and retain carbon in the soil, in the sediments. And the amount of carbon in the soil is actually where the gold mine is. We can have upwards of 80, sometimes upwards of 95% of the total ecosystem carbon stored in the soil and not in the actual trees and plants. So what happened, and these are highly organic soils. If you go into a mangrove, into a mangrove forest, the sediment is really dark, and that is a signal that it's rich in carbon, rich in organic matter. Uh, but since it's flooded, the microbes that would normally start decomposing that organic matter cannot work, and so that organic matter just keeps piling up over centuries, millennia even, and so we have this rich layer that goes many meters deep. What happens when mangroves are cut down and drained is that this sediment is suddenly not flooded anymore. It starts drying out, and that allows for microbial activity to consume the organic matter and decompose it, and then uh, emit CO2 into the atmosphere, or release that CO2 that was contained in the soils onto the atmosphere, but just by decomposition. Microbes, that's what they do. So when you convert, or when people convert um, mangroves to other uses, and specifically shrimp farms in this case, we have this effect of a huge loss of stored carbon into the atmosphere. So what we have been doing or documenting now is exactly how much of that carbon comes and goes across those dynamics of mangrove loss, conversion to shrimp farms, and then potentially regeneration. And we've discovered that shrimp farms and other uh, productive quote unquote land uses that cut down mangroves have a huge impact on global emissions. Uh, Shrimp farming is a very highly profitable activity all around the world, and a lot of coastal communities and peoples depend upon this activity. So it's something that's been done, and we're actively working to better inform people about these impacts. We have within Conservation International and the Blue Climate Program that I'm currently leading, we have what is called a climate smart shrimp initiative. And what we're doing with this is we're taking traditional shrimp farming, and we are uh, implementing new techniques that are enable the shrimp farmers to increase their productivity per unit area. So instead of expanding their operation, they can get as much, or even, the, I forget the exact statistic right now, but many more shrimp, or many more times their production in the same area. But at the same time, yes, but at the same time, what we are also doing is integrating mangrove restoration to those shrimp farm operations. And this has multiple benefits. We promote the regrowth of mangroves. That protects the shrimp farm ponds from increasing storm action, sea level rise, flooding. At the same time, the effluents, the wastewater from the shrimps, instead of going straight into the ocean, they go through the mangrove forest. The contaminants and the sediments get filtered out, and then the water that goes back into the ocean is cleaner, or clean. So we have that, there's this shared benefits from nature into human activities, and we can use both systems, preserve it, and even in some cases strengthen the livelihood and the income of people doing shrimp farming. But at the same time, we're also having really good impact on restoring nature, and using these mangrove ecosystems for both climate change mitigation, so uh, scrubbing CO2 off the atmosphere, but at the same time, we have the adaptation benefits, as we call it. We're helping local people adapt to greater sea level rise, stronger and more frequent storms, filtering of water and contaminants, as I was mentioning. So there's as we continue to build on this new set of technologies, I think we see large opportunities to balance economic development and human well-being with the conservation of nature, both at the local scale and at the global scale as well.
I think that's absolutely fantastic. But I am wondering if it came specifically to looking at ecological restoration of the mangroves, would it be objectively better if there were no shrimp farms at all, or is there a way that the shrimp farms can actually make it a larger, bring back more life potentially, or is it just kind of integrating that with the way the society works there or the business?
That is a very keen uh, question and comment, um, Ethan. I would say, of course, the ideal situation would be to completely restore these ecosystems and have them go back to whatever their pristine condition was. However, this is a human-dominated planet, and people need to
Right.
live and thrive, and it's only fair that people who are developing or these economic activities near the coastal zones, they also deserve their income and their fair share and good livelihood. So we are well aware of that, and I think the years when the conservation movement just wanted people out of nature is long gone, and humans, we are part of nature, and so by integrating and balancing these different pressures and benefits, or co-benefits from integrating nature with built infrastructure and economic activity, I think we can balance and promote the benefits for both nature and humans.
I love that perspective. I just wanted to ask because I'm curious. But yeah, I know if it's only a marginal difference, then it's really that doesn't make much sense to completely remove livelihoods, and we know that that's not realistic anyways. But just trying to get an understanding of the way these ecosystems work. Why do you think there's such little press surrounding blue carbon and mangroves if they're these such rich carbon sinks?
Well, I would say two things. One of them, I think, is historical. We've been working on blue carbon for about a little over 10 years, and that's not a long time for some topics, especially when they come from the science. It takes a while for science to trickle down into popular media. So that I would think is one reason. But I would also say that we are receiving increasing attention in the press. Um, First of all, because as global global change, the global change challenges are increasing. Nature, as an essential climate change solution, is increasing its potential globally as well. And blue carbon, in particular, is one of those types of nature-based solutions. Uh, Back by the end of last year at the UNFCCC meeting, the United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change meeting, we do this every year. Um, Blue carbon was all over the place. It was amazing. It was uh, I remember being at these meetings 10 years ago, and only a handful of people were in the audience when we did a side event or a presentation, and now people were just jam packed in these small COVID-ridden rooms,
Awesome.
and it was absolutely awesome. It's like, okay, finally, I think we've reached the tipping point of people's attention. Uh, the UNFCCC now has an ocean nexus dialogue where we have been able, through our scientific work and the policy advising and the on the ground work that we're doing, we have finally gotten the UNFCCC, the United Nations um, area, or bodies, to realize how important the ocean and the coastal ecosystems are to trying to fix the overall global change dynamics or challenges that we're facing right now. So from that date on, I think there's an inflection point, and we're seeing increasing news coverage, which is just fascinating.
That's awesome. And what gets me so excited is this show, I talk to people I find interesting like yourself, but I talk to people from all different backgrounds who are specifically usually aligned on this environmental issue. And I keep hearing business trends, voluntary carbon market. Now you're talking about blue carbon. There's increasing interest in this space. And I think that's pretty good for me because I'm in the climate real estate market. So this whole area is blowing up.
Yes.
And this climate doomism, we got to put an end to it because there's so many people who are really passionate and doing the amazing work we need, and I feel like we're gonna come together and make this happen like humans do. When it comes to talking to these government officials, like what specific advice do you give to them about protecting mangroves in coastal areas?
I should say that I feel really fortunate to have been able to actually be part of those types of dialogues. One challenge that scientists face a lot of the time is translating our results, our knowledge, and our passion in a subject onto uh, digestible tidbits that can lead to national and global action. And by being involved in blue carbon, like I said, I feel enormously grateful and fortunate to have been able to learn some of those abilities. So, there is some science that needs to be shared. And I specifically remember this one meeting with the Costa Rican authorities, where after about 6 years of research, I had amassed this enormous amount of data, and all of that, of course, was summarized in one graph. Science can be built in that way. So all of it, half a lifetime of work was summarized in this one graph. But what that graph showed was the amount of carbon that is sequestered in mangroves in Costa Rica, average of 800 to 1200 um, tons of carbon per hectare. And then the dynamics of those mangroves being converted to other uses, to agricultural lands and to shrimp ponds. We have over a 94% loss of carbon when we do that. And Costa Rica is a leading climate champion all over the world. We have embarked on decarbonizing our economy. Uh, we were the first, or one of the first countries promoting carbon neutrality across the globe. And here we are with this greenhouse accounting debt uh, that we need to fix. So it was a marvelous turning point where the policymakers I was talking at the moment is like, wait, we cannot allow this to happen anymore. What do we do? I'm like, glad you asked. Here's mangroves. Uh, and it's sparked a whole new conversation, and it's been very interesting to be part of all of that process. So, learning to communicate our messages to policymakers, to decision makers, and also, um, one of the great things about the work that we do is that we have this tagline. We put feet in the mud. Um, so at the same time as we're working with IPCC, with UN uh, bodies and national governments, we are also working on the ground, working with people, trying to learn what their challenges are and how we can use this new and improved knowledge about coastal ecosystems to actually improve their livelihoods because they depend on the stability of these ecosystems to eat. And very early on, when I started working with blue carbon, I learned that you talk about blue carbon and climate change mitigation to a poor fisher in some God forgotten area in a third world country, and it doesn't make sense. It really doesn't make sense because they're worried about going out fishing that day and potentially returning without a catch and not being able to feed their family. So, we have to be mindful of that really extreme reality that people are facing. Millions of people, tens of millions of people are facing around the world. So when we are designing these blue carbon strategies and projects, we are strongly mindful of having to incorporate people and also finding solutions for them to have better livelihoods and at the same time, protecting the environment that would in turn provide them with the resources to live better lives.
Yeah. I mean, you just got me thinking. I don't usually think about this like most of us Americans do, but when you talk about 10 million people who need to go out and get food for their family, and we're just throwing out 50% of our food in America because it's after the expiration date, it's despicable in my mind. But anyways, that has nothing to do with mangroves. Is it fair to say that this hydrological, if that's the word, like restoration, meaning removal of barriers to water flow, is like the most effective way to restore these landscapes? Is that trying to make it simple for
Yes,
like me to understand?
yes. So just to recap, the mangroves and other blue carbon ecosystems depend on the exchange and the flow of seawater and fresh water, you know, along the coast. So whenever that is blocked or altered in some way, the natural conditions that allow those ecosystems to thrive go away, and then the trees, mangrove trees, start dying. Coral reefs start dying because of sedimentation, etc. So now we realize that by bringing back those stable ecological conditions, nature has its own ability to come back very quickly, unless the damage that we've done to that ecosystem functioning is beyond repair. And then we have to give it a little push, or a big push sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, at least it still can be done. This has been so great to hear from you. Can you tell me a bit about the work you do for the IPCC before we kind of sign off here?
Yes, of course. So the IPCC is the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, and this is a group of thousands of scientists all over the world. And what we do is we look at the current science, the latest science, and assess how how strong or robust it is regarding it, related to all these different scientific issues that are linked to climate change and global change in general. So I was extremely humbled to be chosen as one of those scientists. I participated in the last. We have within the IPCC we have cycles of review and some special reports on very specific topics. So I was a lead author in the special report on the oceans and the cryosphere. And for that report specifically, we looked at the latest science um, that has been developed related to the relationship between global climate and oceans, and also the cryosphere. And the cryosphere is just very simply all the surface around the world that is covered by ice. And as as global global temperatures have risen, the balance between snowfall, ice accumulation, and thawing of all of that material is off balance. So that is one point of interest. The ocean, being so big, has the ability to absorb a lot of the increased heat that we have been putting out into the atmosphere, into the planet. So that causes effects physical. Water, as it warms, it expands. So that's part of the reason why we have sea level rise. But it also has provided us with a buffering opportunity in time to not suffer the worst effects, or the potentially worst effects, of climate change. So we've gone through all this process. It's a year, almost 2 years long process of gathering all this information, assessing it, uh, having these long discussions about the validity of the results, how strong the science is, what inferences can we infer from those, what are the implications for, in my case, for coastal communities, how we can use this knowledge to better improve and protect these communities, restore ecosystems. So it's been an enormously privileged opportunity that I've had, and it completely changed my thinking about these problems. Before enrolling into the IPCC, I used to focus on small scale problems and working with communities and small regions within Central America and the Caribbean. But then the IPCC allowed me to look at the global scope of the challenges that we're facing, and commit myself to going beyond these uh, local places, and actually work at trying to create global impact with the type of work that we do.
Definitely. So were you like collecting like like levels of the sea in different areas, or what exactly? Like, were you collecting data, or were you more like analyzing what was given and been participating in like discourse?
So what the IPCC does is it gathers already published information. Uh, yeah,
Oh,
and some
okay.
of that information, of course, comes from research that the IPCC members have done, but it's not exclusive. I mean, we don't just look at our papers. We look at thousands, I mean, literally thousands of papers that are out there regarding the specific topics that we're looking at. And then the special reports are arranged in chapters, and each of those chapters looks at a specific issue. So there were about 20 of us looking at adaptation issues. So how do we deal with the effects of increasing sea level rise, stronger and more frequent storms? How do we look at that and potentially present solutions uh, to coastal communities? So that was my role within that larger report. I was part of this one chapter looking at adaptation issues. And there were other people looking at the physics of ice formation and melting. There were others looking at the ocean physics and currents and how those change because of climate change, et cetera. And together we build this report. And it's a very it's fascinating. I'm fascinated by scientific processes all the time. But there's all these people, really smart people, working on these processes, and then we have what we call peer review, and that means whatever we come up with, we share with scientific communities, and then it's not just a couple of hundred people working on the report. It's literally tens of thousands of really high level scientists looking at what we're saying with eyeglasses on and assessing whether we are right or wrong, whether they agree, scientific community agrees, whether we can improve. And I remember, and we go through these cycles 3 times. And for the first draft, what we call a zero draft review, so the first pass at this report, we received over 80,000 comments just for the chapter I was working alone. you know, right?
Whoa.
And because the IPCC process is so exhaustive, you have to look at every single one of those comments and respond to it. And some are editorial. Those are the easy ones. And it's like,
Uh-huh.
I think you should have a comma here, or the proper term is not this, it's that. Fine, we fix that. But some others, they're huge. They're huge writings. Half a page of the reasons why you're missing the mark on the assessment that you just did, and 20 other references that you might have missed, supporting or not supporting the points that you're making. And then you have to, go read all those papers and consider, and then together with the group, come up with an agreement on how we're going to address this. Are we right? Are we not right? Is the evidence strong enough? Can we say this? Can we say that? How confident are we? Um, so it's a lot of work, but it's a mission that you're on as a scientist, and it's a welcome endeavor. And I'm really thankful that I was able to participate in that process.
I'm so thankful that you were willing to participate in this podcast, man. I'm so glad I asked that last question as well, because I always hear people are like, "Oh, we used to think that the Earth revolved or the sun revolved around the Earth, so you can't trust scientists because sometimes they're wrong." But when you explain the rigor of the peer review process and the IPC process, it just goes to show, like it is not the 16th century, 15th century anymore. We have robust processes that can really be scrutinized to get to the best possible observation. And then, of course, we still don't know nearly as much as we could. But I know a little bit more today thanks to you. So it's been really great having you. I always love to ask people at the end any advice they have for young folks who are passionate about building a better world.
Well, before I answer your question, Ethan, I also would like to thank you for the opportunity to be here with you in your podcast and your show. This has been, lots of fun to be talking with you and sharing some of these tidbits. I could go on for. I talk too much when I get excited about some topics, so I could go on for days. But thank you very much for sharing. I hope what little I have been able to share has been useful and will be useful for your audience. And specifically talking to the younger audience, that was your question. I think two things. The first is, don't be scared about science. People tend to say math is hard. No, not really. Science is confusing. No, not really. What a scientist is a kid that never stopped asking questions. That is what a scientist is. So if you're one of those kids or young person who asks lots of questions and annoy people because you're always asking why, you're a scientist. Keep on doing that because that is what keeps knowledge advancing. That is what helps us find solutions to the most pressing challenges we're facing right now as a humanity, and also helps us fix the little things as well. uh, so keep asking those questions. Get yourself involved in learning more about yourself, about the world, and also the involvement is very important. I truly believe that individual actions, changing yourselves or ourselves and improving ourselves and the communities around us is the first step to actually addressing broader, more important issues as well. So don't leave this for others to fix. This is a shared responsibility that we all have, and we're committed to fixing it.
Cool. Miguel, it's been great having you on the show, man. I really appreciate you taking the
Absolutely.
time, and I appreciate all the I appreciate all the research you're doing as well. And I just continue to have a lot of hope because of so many amazing people doing amazing things.
We that humanity as a whole is an amazing, I don't know, organism that keeps evolving.
Indeed.
And yeah, despite the challenges that we're facing right now, we cannot allow ourselves to be in a negative mood. I mean, we can do this. However challenging it is, we will be able to fix this. So thank you very much.
You're very welcome. I think it's all about where you put your focus. So keep focusing on the positive. All right, everybody. We'll see you.
Thank you all.
So if you or anyone else you know is looking to buy or sell a home anywhere in the USA and would like to create thousands of dollars in donations without any cost out of pocket, please visit ccrboulder.com today.